Okay, so you wanted to know more about the historical roots of fascism.
Yeah.
And you've given us quite the reading list. We've got excerpts from a 2005 article by Alan and Rachel Douglas titled Ledeen's Beloved Universal Fascism, Venetian War Against the Nation State. To
Right.
dive into,
Right.
buckle up because this is going to get fascinating.
It is.
So to understand this idea of universal fascism,
Yeah.
we have to start with Michael Ledeen.
Okay.
He's a prominent neoconservative who wrote a pretty controversial book called Universal Fascism back in 1972.
So Ledeen's work is controversial, to say the least.
Uh-huh.
He goes beyond just studying fascism.
Right.
He actually argues that traditional fascist regimes like Mussolini's Italy were like a betrayed revolution.
Okay.
They strayed from what he sees as the true essence of fascism.
That's a pretty bold claim.
It is.
So how does he define this universal fascism?
Well, he believes that universal fascism is less about a specific political program and more about a drive for power
Okay.
that transcends national borders. It's about a small group of elites shaping the world according to their vision, often through perpetual war and revolution.
So it sounds pretty radical.
It is.
He actually says in his book that fascism should sweep away the decadence of Western civilization in its nationalist and capitalist aspects, as well as in its most ancient and solemn one, Christianity.
That's right.
Does Ledeen believe that this kind of upheaval can happen peacefully?
Not at all.
Okay.
Ledeen sees perpetual war and revolution as like essential tools for remaking the world.
I see.
And this is where his fascination with Venice comes into play.
Venice.
Yes, Venice.
You mean the city of canals and gondolas?
Exactly.
Okay.
Ledeen actually spent years in Venice, mentored by Count Vittorio Cini, who was a former minister in Mussolini's cabinet.
Wow.
And Cini granted him access to secret Freemasonic archives.
Imagine getting your hands on those archives.
Right.
So what did Ledeen find there?
What we do know is that Ledeen emerged from his time in Venice with this idea that the city's historical oligarchical system,
ruled by a small elite group of merchants and financiers,
right,
was like a prototype for his vision of universal fascism.
interesting.
It's about control and manipulation on a grand scale,
Yeah.
transcending national boundaries.
So how does this connect back to his argument about Mussolini being a betrayed revolution?
Ledeen admires a very specific historical example that he believes embodies the true spirit of universal fascism.
Okay.
Gabriele D'Annunzio's takeover of Fiume in 1919.
Right.
This short-lived regime with its black shirts, forced castor oil ingestion,
Oh, wow.
and Roman salutes became a model for Mussolini.
Okay.
But Ledeen believes that even Mussolini didn't go far enough.
So D'Annunzio's regime was definitely brutal.
Yes, very much so.
Can you tell us a bit more about why Ledeen admires him so much?
Well, Ledeen sees D'Annunzio as embodying the Dionysian ideal,
Okay.
the pursuit of power and destruction, even self-destruction, in a constant struggle against what he viewed as the decadence of modern society.
Right. It's a stark contrast to the Promethean ideal of progress through knowledge and innovation.
It's a chilling comparison.
It is.
The Promethean ideal of knowledge versus this Dionysian drive for power and destruction.
Right.
It makes you wonder which force is more dominant in our world today.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And D'Annunzio's Fiume experiment with its blend of aesthetics, violence, and this rejection of traditional morality foreshadowed a broader movement taking shape across Europe, the Synarchist movement.
So this is where we start to see Ledeen's ideas connecting to a wider network of individuals and groups.
Precisely.
Okay.
The Synarchists were a shadowy network of financiers and industrialists who supported fascist movements across Europe.
Interesting.
They believed that a small group of powerful individuals should control Europe's economic destiny.
That sounds eerily familiar.
It does.
Are there any prominent figures among the Synarchists that our listener might recognize?
One key player was Count Giuseppe Volpi di Misurata. He was a Venetian financier who was instrumental in Mussolini's rise to power.
Got it.
His activities in the Balkans, particularly his involvement in the 1903 Serbian coup and the 1908 Young Turks coup, were crucial in destabilizing the region and contributing to World War I.
So we see how Volpi was using his financial and political influence to shape events.
Yes.
And ultimately sow chaos in Europe.
Right.
To understand the Synarchist vision more fully, though, we need to unpack their concept of a corporatist society.
We do.
Corporatism. Doesn't that sound like a system where employers and employees work together in harmony?
It does on the surface.
Okay.
But the Synarchists' vision of corporatism was much more about controlling the economy for the benefit of a powerful elite.
So it's more like a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Exactly.
It sounds appealing, but ultimately concentrates power in the hands of a few.
Precisely.
And this brings us back to Ledeen and how his understanding of fascism aligns with this synarchist vision of a corporatist world order. Now, Ledeen's activities in Italy during the 1970s and 1980s get even more controversial.
Me too.
He was linked to the P2 Masonic Lodge, a group with ties to all sorts of scandals. And there are allegations that he was involved in intelligence operations.
Right.
Even covering up major terrorist attacks.
That's a serious accusation.
It is.
And it raises a lot of questions about the true nature of Ledeen's involvement in these events.
Yeah, was he a rogue actor? Or was he part of a larger network of influence?
Exactly.
And if so, what were the goals of that network?
Right.
The connections here are pretty wild.
Yeah.
It's starting to sound like a real-life spy thriller.
It is.
So what happened next?
Well, it leads us to one of the most disturbing aspects of Ledeen's story. The Temple Mount plot.
Okay, tell me more about this plot.
This plot involved individuals close to Ledeen, including his wife, who were allegedly involved in a plan to blow up the dome of the Rock Mosque in Jerusalem.
Can you imagine the consequences if that had actually happened?
It's terrifying to think about.
What were they hoping to achieve?
Well, it highlights this dangerous intersection of religious extremism and political machinations that runs through Ledeen's thinking and that of his associates.
Right.
But what's particularly interesting here is the Venetian connection to this plot.
What do you mean?
Well, one of the key players, Eduardo Recconati, came from an old Venetian banking family.
I see.
And there was also involvement from prominent Freemasons, including members of the Quattuor Coronati Lodge, a group with historical ties to Venice.
So even in this seemingly isolated and extreme incident, we see these threads connecting back to Venice and its legacy of oligarchical control.
Right.
To round out this story, we need to talk about Ada Bozeman.
Okay.
So who is Ada Bozeman, and how does she fit into this complicated network of people and events?
Ada Bozeman was a scholar who advocated for using Venetian-style intelligence methods in U.S. foreign policy. She believed that nation-states were becoming obsolete.
So is she suggesting that nation-states are no longer the primary players on the world stage?
Yes.
Okay.
And this idea resonated deeply with Ledeen. He endorsed Bozeman's views and argued for a secretive, oligarchical approach to foreign policy, one that bypasses democratic oversight.
It really makes you wonder about the implications for democracy in a world where these kinds of ideas gain traction.
It does.
It's a bit unsettling to hear all of this talk about a new man and a post-nation-state world. Are we seeing echoes of these ideas in modern political discourse?
That's something we'll explore in more detail as we continue this deep dive. But it's clear that understanding these historical connections is crucial if we want to make sense of the forces shaping our world today.
It is. Yeah, it's definitely unsettling to think about how these ideas from the past might be resurfacing in new ways.
You're right to pick up on that.
Ledeen's vision of a world shaped by these secretive elites, operating beyond the reach of traditional nation-states. It feels both ancient and strangely contemporary.
You're right.
Yeah.
We're seeing challenges to the power of nation-states today from all directions. Multinational corporations, global institutions, even online communities that transcend national borders.
It's like we're looking through this distorted mirror.
Exactly.
Yeah, seeing reflections of the past and the present.
And that's why it's so important to understand these historical connections, to recognize the patterns and the ideologies that have shaped our world. We need to be aware of how these ideas might be resurfacing, sometimes in new and potentially dangerous ways.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
From Venetian oligarchs to secret societies, to shadowy intelligence operations.
It's a lot.
I think we need to step back for a moment and talk about what all of this means for us today.
Okay.
What are the key takeaways from all of this?
Well, one of the most important takeaways is that fascism isn't just a historical phenomenon confined to a particular time and place. It's an ideology, a way of thinking about power and control. that can manifest in different forms across time and culture.
So we need to be vigilant, right?
Absolutely.
We need to recognize the signs of this ideology,
yes,
even when they're presented in a more subtle or sophisticated package.
we need to be critical thinkers.
Okay.
We need to question assumptions,
Right.
and we need to be wary of any ideology that seeks to concentrate power in the hands of a few, whether it's called fascism or something else entirely.
I think we also need to be wary of those who, like Ledeen, advocate for secrecy and a lack of accountability in government.
Yes, definitely.
If those in power are operating in the shadow,
Right.
it becomes almost impossible to hold them responsible for their actions.
That's a crucial point.
So what can we do as individuals?
Yeah.
How can we resist these potentially dangerous trends?
Well, I think knowledge is one of the most powerful tools we have.
Okay.
The more we understand about history, about ideologies, about the way power operates in the world, the better equipped we are to make informed decisions and to resist those who seek to manipulate us.
Knowledge is power.
It is.
And in this case, it might be the power to recognize and resist the allure of authoritarianism in all its forms.
Precisely. But knowledge alone isn't enough.
Okay.
It needs to be coupled with action.
Right.
We need to engage in the political process to hold our leaders accountable and to speak out against injustice and the abuse of power.
And we need to be willing to challenge those in our own circles who might be drawn to these kinds of ideologies. We can't just sit back and hope that things will work themselves out.
Right.
We need to be active and engaged citizens.
I agree.
I need to be willing to have those difficult conversations, to challenge assumptions.
Yes.
And to stand up for what we believe in. Even if it means standing alone sometimes.
That's right.
This deep dive has really been an eye-opener.
It has.
It's shown us that the past isn't really past.
Right.
It's still shaping our present in profound ways.
It is.
And it's up to us to understand those connections and make sure we're not repeating the mistakes of history.
It's been eye-opening for me too. And honestly, it's left me with a sense of both urgency and hope.
Okay.
Urgency because the threats to democracy are very real and very present, but also hope because I believe we as informed and engaged citizens have the power to resist those threats and to create a better future.
It's a powerful message.
It is.
We're not just helpless bystanders in this unfolding story.
Right.
We each have a role to play, and it starts with understanding the forces at work as we've begun to do in this deep dive.
You said it.
So let's keep diving, keep questioning, and keep working to build a world that's more just equitable and free.
Well said. I couldn't agree more.
Now, turning back to the specifics of Ledeen's vision, one of the things that he finds so compelling about D'Annunzio and the Synarchists is their rejection of Enlightenment values, especially the Promethean ideal of progress through knowledge and reason.
That's a key point. For Ledeen and those who share his worldview, the Enlightenment represents a kind of decadence, a weakening of the human spirit.
I see.
They romanticize a more primal, instinctual way of being.
So they're essentially rejecting the very foundations of modern Western thought.
In many ways, yes. They see the Enlightenment as a wrong turn.
Right.
A deviation from a more authentic way of life.
This reminds me of something we touched on earlier.
Yeah.
This idea of the new man that Ledeen talks about.
Okay.
Can you elaborate on that a bit more?
Sure.
What are the characteristics of this new man?
Okay.
And how does he fit into this rejection of Enlightenment values?
The new man in Ledeen's vision is someone who is unconstrained by traditional morality. Someone who embraces conflict and struggle as essential to human existence.
Right.
He is driven by instinct and will not by reason or compassion.
Wow.
It's a very Nietzschean concept, rooted in the idea of the Übermensch or Superman, who transcends the limitations of ordinary human beings.
That sounds like a dangerous path, to say the least.
It's certainly a controversial idea.
Glorifying instinct over reason?
Right.
Embracing conflict as a way of life? It seems like a recipe for chaos and destruction.
It's important to remember that this is just one perspective, one interpretation of history and human nature.
Right.
But it's a perspective that has had a significant influence, and it's one that we need to understand if we want to engage in meaningful conversations about the challenges facing us today.
So how does this rejection of Enlightenment values connect to the rise of fascist movements in the 20th century? Were there any specific Enlightenment thinkers or ideas that fascists like Mussolini and Hitler explicitly targeted?
Fascist movements often demonized Enlightenment thinkers like John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Immanuel Kant, whose ideas about individual liberty, social contract theory, and universal moral principles were seen as a threat to their authoritarian ambitions.
Interesting.
They particularly despised the Enlightenment's emphasis on reason, tolerance, and human progress. They saw these values as decadent and weakening, a symptom of a civilization in decline.
So instead of reason and progress, they offered what?
Right.
What did fascism propose as an alternative to the Enlightenment vision?
Fascist movements appealed to emotion, to a sense of shared identity based on race, nation, or ideology.
Got it.
They glorified violence and struggle as a means of achieving national rebirth and restoring a mythical past.
So when people feel afraid and insecure, they're often drawn to strong leaders who promise simple solutions. And fascists were masters of propaganda, using it to exploit those fears and manipulate public opinion.
Right.
So how did these themes of rejecting Enlightenment values and appealing to emotion and instinct play out in the writings of someone like Michael Ledeen? We've talked about his admiration for D'Annunzio and the Synarchists.
Yes.
But how do his own words reflect these deeper currents?
Ledeen's work is full of references to the need for a new man who is unburdened by the decadent values of the Enlightenment. He sees democracy as weak and ineffective, arguing that true strength lies in a small elite group of individuals who are willing to use any means necessary to achieve their goals.
It's a very dark and cynical worldview.
It is.
It seems to deny the possibility of progress through peaceful means. Through dialogue and compromise.
It does. And that's why it's so important to critically examine these ideas and to understand their historical context. We need to be aware of the dangers of romanticizing violence.
And of surrendering power to those who claim to have all the answers.
This brings us back to the importance of education and critical thinking.
It does.
We need to equip ourselves and future generations with the tools to recognize and resist these dangerous ideologies, no matter what form they take.
Absolutely.
We need to encourage a healthy skepticism of authority, a willingness to question assumptions, and a commitment to open and honest dialogue.
That's the best defense against the allure of authoritarianism in all its forms.
It sounds like we've only just scratched the surface of this complex and fascinating topic.
We have.
There's so much more to explore, especially when we consider how these ideas from the past are manifesting in the world today.
Absolutely.
So where do we go from here?
What
are some specific things our listener can do to continue this deep dive and learn more about these historical connections and their implications for the present?
There are several avenues for further exploration.
First, I would recommend diving deeper into the history of fascism itself. There are many excellent books and articles that explore the rise of fascist movements in the 20th century, their ideologies, and their lasting impact.
Are there any specific authors or titles that you would recommend?
Certainly. For a comprehensive overview, I would recommend The Anatomy of Fascism by Robert Paxton. It's a classic work that provides a detailed analysis of the origins, development, and characteristics of fascist movements across Europe.
Excellent. What else?
Another valuable resource is The Origins of Totalitarianism by Hannah Arendt. Although not solely focused on fascism, Arendt's work provides a brilliant analysis of the rise of totalitarian regimes in the 20th century and the conditions that made their rise possible.
Those both sound like essential reading for anyone interested in understanding the deeper roots of fascism and its connection to contemporary events.
Absolutely. And for a more focused look at the Venetian connection and the role of secret societies, I would recommend Venice, A Cultural History by John Julius Norwich, and The Secret Societies of Europe by Archon de Rol.
Got it.
These books offer a fascinating glimpse into the hidden history of Venice and the shadowy networks of power that have long operated beneath the surface.
Those are fantastic recommendations.
They are.
I'm definitely adding those to my reading list.
Great.
What other advice would you give to our listener who wants to continue this deep dive on their own?
I would encourage our listener to engage with diverse perspectives.
Okay.
And to be willing to challenge their own assumptions.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to ask difficult questions, to explore uncomfortable truths,
Right.
and to seek out information that might challenge your existing worldview.
That's great advice.
It is.
It's easy to get caught in echo chambers and to surround ourselves with people who share our opinions.
Right.
But true learning happens when we step outside of our comfort zones and engage with perspectives that are different from our own.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And remember, critical thinking is an ongoing process. It's not a destination,
Right.
but a journey. The more we learn, the more we realize how much more there is to learn.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes to the hidden connections between history, ideology, and the forces shaping our world today.
Me too.
I feel like I've gained a new perspective on the challenges facing us.
Yeah.
And a renewed sense of urgency about the need to engage in these critical conversations.
I feel the same way.
It's been a privilege to share these insights with you and our listener.
The pleasure was all mine.
And I hope this deep dive has inspired a deeper curiosity and a willingness to continue exploring these important questions.
Yeah.
This has been a really thought-provoking conversation.
Yes.
And you've given us a lot to consider.
Yeah.
We started with this one article about universal fascism.
Right?
But it's clear that these ideas have deep roots.
They do.
And they touch on some really fundamental questions about power ideology and the future of our world.
It's true. We've explored some pretty disturbing territory today.
We have.
But as we've said, knowledge is power.
Right.
And understanding the historical context of these ideas,
Yeah.
recognizing the patterns is the first step in effectively challenging them.
It's like we've been given this decoder ring.
Exactly.
This new lens through which to view current events.
Yeah.
And honestly, it can be a bit unsettling.
It can be, but it's far better to face these uncomfortable truths than to remain in ignorance.
Right.
Remember, this is just one interpretation of history and human nature.
Okay.
It's important to engage with a variety of perspectives,
Right.
to challenge your own assumptions, and to think critically about the information you're consuming.
Absolutely. We need to be aware of our own biases.
Yeah.
To be open to new ideas.
Right.
And to engage in respectful dialogue, even with those who hold different views.
Exactly. That's the beauty of critical thinking. It's an ongoing process, a journey of discovery.
Right.
We're never truly finished learning and evolving.
This whole deep dive has been a wild ride.
It has.
We started with this seemingly straightforward question
Yeah.
about the historical roots of fascism,
Right.
and we ended up uncovering this whole web of intrigue
I did.
involving secret societies, intelligence operations,
Right.
and powerful individuals operating outside the bounds of traditional political systems.
It has been quite the journey.
It has, and it shows the power of curiosity.
It does.
When we start asking questions, digging deeper,
Right.
we often uncover things we never expected to find.
That's true.
Sometimes those discoveries are uncomfortable, even disturbing.
Yeah.
But I think it's better to face those uncomfortable truths than to remain in ignorance.
I agree.
Ignorance might feel blissful in the short term,
Right.
but in the long run, it's a recipe for disaster.
I couldn't agree more. Knowledge is the key to empowerment.
It is.
It allows us to make informed decisions
Yeah.
and to shape a better future for ourselves and for generations to come.
So what stands out to you the most from all of this?
Okay.
What's the one thing you hope our listener takes away from this deep dive?
For me, it's the realization that history isn't just a collection of dates and events.
Right.
It's a living, breathing thing that continues to shape our world in profound ways.
Yeah.
Oh.
We have a responsibility to understand history, to learn from it,
Right.
and to make sure we're not repeating the mistakes of the past.
And maybe, just maybe, we can use that knowledge to create a future that's more just,
I hope so.
more equitable and more free than the past.
Yeah.
To build a world where power is truly accountable to the people it's supposed to serve.
That's a beautiful thought, and one that I wholeheartedly believe is possible.
Yeah.
But it's going to take awareness, critical thinking, and a commitment to action from all of us.
Well said. That's a perfect note to end on.
It is.
Thank you for joining me on this deep dive.
The pleasure was all mine.
It's been an incredible journey.
It has. And to you, dear listener, thank you for going on this deep dive with us.
Yeah.
Keep questioning, keep exploring, and until next time, happy diving.